Hey, welcome to the first episode of Iron Maidens, a podcast where we spotlight female veterans and share their stories. I'm your host, Bevin Goldsmith, and I thought it would be fitting to start off by sharing a bit about myself and my military journey. So buckle up. This is going to be a ride because I've done a lot of crap. So I enlisted in the Air National Guard July 7th, 2006 as an aircraft mechanic. Being from Michigan, my duty station was Selfridge Air National Guard Base. So back then, Selfridge only had F-16s, and we were still rocking the old school BDUs. So that's how old I am, and shining black boots. So since the base only operated F-16s, I was assigned to work on that specific airframe when I was in tech school. So when I went to tech school, that's the airframe that was my concentration, was F-16s. We learned kind of like an overview of a couple of different airframes when I was in tech school, but the F-16 was primarily what I focused on, or my class focused on. So basic training took place at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. And I graduated, January 12th, 2007. After that is when I headed off to tech school, which tech school is split into two parts. So the first portion lasted about 5 months or 672 hours of training. That was at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas. So that phase was with the 82nd Training Group, and we worked on what were called cold or static aircraft. So they were all decommissioned planes that either didn't turn on or they did turn on, and we were able to like pull them apart and put them back together like Legos. So honestly, I loved it. I've always been fascinated by aircraft, so being in that environment felt like heaven to me. That being said, tech school was tough. The fail-out rate was very high because they were preparing us to work on multi-billion-dollar aircraft. So we had to be able to spot issues during pre-flight inspections, so the pilot wouldn't end up in a life-threatening situation. Very important stuff. We were required to maintain 80% or higher to stay in the program. A lot of information, a lot of information to take in. So I graduated from cold training May 25th, 2007. Then I moved on to what's called hot training. This phase involved working on fully functional aircraft with real pilots inside. So hot training took place at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, again with the 82nd Training Group, but under the 372nd TRS Detachment 12. Attention to detail became even more crucial in this phase, obviously, because there's real people inside the planes. So not just for doing the job right and passing the school, but for personal safety and making sure your pilot got back down on the ground after a flight. I will never forget one particular day at Luke. It was my second week there. The temperature was 110 degrees, definitely 5 to 10 degrees hotter out on the flight line, so probably like 120. I was exhausted, I was sweaty, and definitely not feeling like I was living my best life. I was tasked with doing a launch of an F-16. So I was getting ready to marshal out that aircraft. Our instructors supervised every launch that we did. So I was not out there by myself. And I was classroom leader. So my class was just standing on the side watching me with my supervisor, my teacher. And I'm, getting the pilot in the air. And as I gave the pilot the thumbs up and started waving him forward, I did my little Michael Jackson style right face and salute. And what I didn't realize was that I was standing directly in the path of the plane's right wingtip, which had AIM 9 on the end of it. So it hung low enough to take my head off. My instructor moved so fast, he yanked me out of the way just in time. And I gave him this sheepish look, and he raised an eyebrow at me, clearly not impressed. All he said was, "You almost got decapitated because you weren't aware of your surroundings. These planes are dangerous. Fix it." He didn't yell at me, but his stern tone was more than enough for me. I was already kicking myself for the mistake. The self-degradation had already set in. I think that he could tell by the look on my face that I was already beating myself worse than anything he could say to me. So yeah. Lesson learned. The flight line is no joke. Pay attention. Always. It's dangerous out there. You have to pay attention. So I graduated from Luke on June 28th, 2007, and returned to Selfridge, where I did a mix of part-time and AGR work with the 127th Wing Maintenance Group. I was assigned to an aircraft and also worked in the tool crib at one point. So as an F-16 crew chief, my responsibilities included executing daily flight maintenance operations and on my assigned jet. So if something went wrong, it was my job to troubleshoot, repair, install parts as needed. I also performed runway inspections, which involved several types of inspections throughout the day. So you had pre-flight, through flight, end of runway. You had a final inspection after the aircraft was done flying. After each flight, we had to refuel the jet and check it over thoroughly. So pre-flight is what you would do when you're getting the pilot inside the cockpit, buckling him up, hook up his oxygen cord, get the canopy down. You're running through all different types of inspections, asking him to do different things with the plane while it's still on the ground. Throttle up, throttle down, looking at the back of the exhaust, or what we like to call the turkey feathers, seeing them open up, make sure there's nothing wrong, all the lights are working, all that stuff. Those planes break frequently. Like, it is very easy for these aircraft to break. So anything that happens to that plane is your responsibility. You maintain the aircraft forms. Those forms are the it's the history book for that plane. So yeah, anything that happens to that plane is your responsibility. So as the crew chief of that plane, I was maintaining the aircraft forms. Anything that went wrong with it, I was scheduling the maintenance. Even during pre-flight, the plane would be on, my hand would be on the hydraulic lines where the brakes are, and I'd be asking them to pump the brakes. There'd be nothing shooting through the hydraulic lines. I would have to tell them to shut the plane down. You can't take this one. You have to take a different one because you're not going to be able to land when you come back down. So that's your bird. She's yours. Everything that happens to you happens to her is your issue. So if that plane goes up because you weren't paying attention to something, and God forbid it crashes and your pilot dies, you are the very first person that they are calling because that was your aircraft. So yeah, there was no messing around. Attention to detail was a big deal. So fun fact, when you are refueling an aircraft, we actually measure fuel in tons, not gallons. So crew chiefs we are constantly trying to convert gallons to tons to ensure that the aircraft has exactly what it needs before it goes back out or gets put to bed for the night. So, fun fact. So I continued working in that role till about mid 2008. And by that point, I started getting the itch to deploy and was also considering a career in law enforcement. At that time, I was contemplating working for the Detroit Police Department. I think I was around 20 years old. And my cousin, who was in the Army, suggested I switch to active duty and go military police, which, seemed like a bright idea to me. So that's just what I did. So I switched from Air National Guard to active Army November 4th, 2008, reported to Fort Sill a few days later. Everyone I was with at Fort Sill was prior service, either switching branches or they were like transferring or coming back in. One of those combinations. So my class was full of experienced military people for the most part. We stayed at Fort Sill for about 2 weeks before being shipped down to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we were stationed with the 1st Brigade 515th Training Regiment for our Warrior Transition Course, or it was also called WTC. So I arrived at WTC November 19th, 2008, and I graduated on December 12th, 2008, as part of Class 09501, 4th Platoon. This was about, I want to say it was like 268 hours of training. So, yeah, a good month. Really good, almost a month. So at that time, I weighed 128 pounds, because you have to understand, I was coming over from the Air Force. So, yes, I was an aircraft mechanic, but, having, I guess having large muscles was not necessarily a prerequisite for that job. So, thankfully, my Navy CB buddies took me under their wing and treated me like their little sister. They were a godsend. So they made sure I ate enough to gain weight and survive the training. So they would go to the little shopette that we had in the building that we were staying in. So the building we were in, there were 2 bays, and you had the female bay and the male bay. And my buddies would come out of their bay, they'd go down to the little shopette, and they would buy me noodles, Snickers bars, all kinds of snacks and stuff like that. They would wrap it up in a blanket, bring it to my bed, my bunk. They would dump it on the bunk, and then they would tell me it better be gone by morning. They also gave me these insane workouts to do every night and morning before I went to bed and I woke up. So I followed this this crazy workout regime, and I was eating all this food. Obviously, not all of it was healthy, but it got the job done. And they were brutally honest with me about military culture. So they told me that if I wanted to be taken seriously in my job and my profession, I needed to take myself seriously, work out, and strive to be the best at whatever it was that I was doing. There was no plan B. So by the time I left WTC, I had gained 12 pounds and was up to 140 pounds. It was up to about 140 pounds. I was a rhinoceros. That's also when I became serious about fitness. And I graduated with the Army physical fitness test, or physical fitness award. So after WTC, I went on to the Military Police Academy at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, also known as Fort Lost in the Woods. I showed up there January 5th, 2009. I was with the 701st Military Police Battalion and quickly realized how much more I needed to work out. Initially, we did PT 3 times a day, though it eventually tapered off, and then sometimes it would go back up depending on the mood of our drill sergeant. So I graduated from the MP Academy on March 12th, 2009 as part of Class 50709. Towards the end of the academy, we had to fill out a wish list of places we wanted to be stationed. Most of my friends put down Germany, so I did that too. And then along with that, I had written down Hawaii, and I want to say I wrote down Korea. Those are the ones that I wrote down. So when the assignments came back, all my friends were headed to Germany, and I was the only one who got Korea. So, go figure. All by my lonesome. Went over to Korea. But I wasn't too upset. My brother had been stationed in Japan with the Marine Corps, so going to Asia, as I said, that was already on my bucket list, so I wasn't too sad about that. So in Korea, I was stationed at Camp Hovey, which is the farthest north in Dongdushan, with HHC 1st Brigade Special Troops Battalion, 2nd Infantry Division, Military Police. I know it's a mouthful, so it'd be HHC 1st BSTB 2I DMPs for short. So essentially, I was policing infantry, which was interesting. Everything soldiers were supposed to do, or weren't supposed to do, I should say, was conveniently located just off post in the area we like to call the Ville. So people, a lot of people who had not been to Korea, have not been to Korea, but they were in the military, would ask me, they still ask me to this day, what kinds of crazy things did you encounter there? Honestly, a lot. In most interviews, I keep my stories PG out of respect for the host, but this is Iron Maidens, where I promised unfiltered raw stories, so here goes. So, one night, while on Ville patrol, our shift ran from, I think it ran from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. for Ville patrol. I got called to a bar where a group of very drunk infantrymen had clearly exceeded the legal BAC. One guy had his bare foot in another guy's mouth, and something about a dare, someone yelling. One guy didn't want to do it, and then someone yelled out, "No balls," and then the whole thing spiraled down from there. So, foot in another soldier's mouth. It was very interesting to walk in on. No clue what was happening. Long story short, I gave them my Yoda speech about, listen, I don't care if you guys want to put parts of each other in each other's mouths, to each their own. Just remember, you're representing the United States Army, so take it back to the barracks. Don't do it at the bar. Also remember, no photos means it didn't happen. Food for thought. They gave me the obligatory, like, yes, ma'am, and headed back to the barracks. That's the direction they headed in. Whether they actually got there, I don't know. I didn't follow them. So, God bless the infantry. Honestly, every single MOS in the military has its quirks. So it's not just the infantry. It's not just the infantry. Every single MOS in the military has its quirks. But you have to love it. That's just part of the adventure. Definitely part of the adventure. So while in Korea, I also competed in several 5Ks. Often I was placing like first and second. Running was very prominent with me alongside of my gym routines, so, which is the other thing that I also maintained while I was in Korea. And I continued to max out my PT score because I promised my buddies I would continue to do that. So I did that. And then I was thrown in what's called the Army has a what's called like a 300 club. So you max out your PT test. Max out your PT test. You can get a certificate that says, congratulations, you're part of the 300 club. Because the max score you can get is 300, and then past 300, you go on what's called an extended scale, which they have it, but they don't use it. So I was promoted to corporal while I was still in Korea, which, for those of you who don't know, made me a junior NCO. So I left Korea in March of 2010, and I PCS'd from Korea, and I was originally on orders to go to Fort Carson in Colorado. However, in mid-flight to my duty station, my orders were changed to Fort Polk, Louisiana. So I ended up going to Fort Polk, where I was assigned to the 515th MP Brigade. And 515th, I want to say it was the 519th. It was actually the 519th MP Brigade, not the 515th. So the 519th MP Brigade. It's difficult sitting here trying to remember all this stuff. Even though I've been through all these interviews, I still sit here and try and rack my brain about the different units that I've been part of. It's a lot. Like, it's a lot to sit here and try and figure out everyone I've been attached to. So it was the 519th MP Brigade at Fort Polk. And then I was placed with the 272nd MP Company. I think I arrived there late March of 2010. And at that time, that unit had just relocated from Germany. So the first few weeks of me being there, there were only about 10 of us. But within a month or so, we reached full capacity. So we were slotted to deploy for Operation New Dawn in January of 2011. So once our numbers were up, we began an intensive year-long deployment training. I think Yeah, so when my company, after we did our deployment training, once my company arrived in Kuwait, we were separated and assigned to different bases in Iraq. So some went to Cobb Spiker in Tikrit, others went to Fob Warrior in Kirkuk. My platoon was stationed at Fob Warhorse in Bakuba, or the Diyala province. And once we got there, our missions varied. They they varied. So we did key leader engagements or KLEs, we did counter IED operations, and we worked with the Diyala police transition team to train Iraqi soldiers in law enforcement. I was also selected for the female engagement team, a role that involved working alongside infantry and special forces to engage with local populations, especially women. So culturally, men can't speak to women. They should not be speaking to women. So they would call in us, the female engagement team, to go out and help them gain intel as to where certain people were. So we were going out looking for people. So my job was to gather intel and help them find people, which most of the time we were attached to infantry units. The primary unit, I want to say the primary unit that we were attached to, or I was attached to when I was doing FET, was the 25th Infantry. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the 25th Infantry. And then during my time at Warhorse, I did over, gosh, 150 missions, which included the KLEs, convoy security, Fed operations, and whatever other specialized tasks they had us doing. So eventually, my platoon left Warhorse and drove to Baghdad, where we ended up getting attached to the 1/8 Cavalry to focus on counter IED missions. So counter IED missions, for those of you who don't know, we would go out on specific routes and we would look for IEDs. Once we would find an IED, we would follow through with our normal procedures, cordon off the area, and call up EOD to come and clear that route. So essentially, we were doing recon for the EOD team. So let's say they went out in that morning or the morning prior, and they cleared a route. They would give us a call, and they would put that route as part of our mission, and we would go out there to double check it to make sure it was still clear. And if it wasn't, obviously, like I said, we would cordon off the area. We would call them up so that they can come and clear it. But that was counter IED missions. We were going out looking for bombs. That's what that was. Yeah. From there, from Baghdad, we drove to Camp Beering in Kuwait. So somewhere in the chaos of all of that, I actually managed to train for and win first place in a half marathon at Cobb Spiker, because my company asked me to represent us while we were over there. So I ended up getting flown from Warhorse on a Black Hawk. I remember that day. I got off mission, literally went to my chew, grabbed my assault pack with my running stuff in it, dropped my weapons, put them where they were supposed to go with the armor. Obviously I had my 9mm. Was I taking my M4? I did have my M4. So anything I didn't need, I just left. I left there in my chew, made sure to lock my door, and then they flew me from Warhorse to Cobb Spiker. I got there, end of the day. Met up with a good friend of mine. I think I went over to the canine facility for a little bit. Hung out over there for a little bit, and then went to bed. Woke up the next morning, did my run, which was a half marathon, so 13 miles. And we were running that thing across the doggone flight line. It was awful. It was very hot. It was very hot. So I did my run, then I went back to my room, took a nap, woke up, got all my stuff back on, and they flew me back to Warhorse. and then I landed, and then I went back to my 2. What did I do that day? Oh, no, I went on mission. Dropped all my stuff, got my kit back on, and I had gone out on mission. So, yeah, it was a big fat turn and burn the whole year. Our deployment, I do have to say, was not without its losses. We did have casualties. We did have a KIA, which hit my unit really hard. My friends and I still struggle with that today. So, yeah, that's rough. War's messy, it's chaotic, it's uncivilized, and unfortunately, that's normal for war. But it changes you, and you definitely don't come back the same. And that's something you have to learn to accept going to war. So, but after returning from Iraq, I had waived my dwell time and planned to return back to Korea. However, my life had other plans. God had other plans for me. I ended up getting pregnant by my boyfriend, and rather than continuing my military career, I chose to focus on becoming a mom. I left the Army under what's called a Chapter 8, which is a pregnancy discharge, and transitioning to civilian life while preparing for motherhood was a whole new challenge for me. So many soldiers struggle to find a sense of purpose after leaving the military. For me, that purpose became being a mom. However, I was still processing my deployment while adjusting to that new chapter in my life. So I was blessed in the sense that I did have a new mission, a new sense of purpose, which was focusing on being a mom. But regardless of that, I was still a soldier. So I had that soldier mentality very much so. So I was still dealing with coming back from deployment. I hadn't been back for long. I'd only been back for maybe a year at that point. I'd been back. So, but once I got out, I didn't want to just sit stagnant. That was not an option for me. So, I decided, okay, we're not going to fall into any negative coping mechanisms. We're not going to sit stagnant. What are we doing? What is the goal here? What are we going to do? So I started school full time. I was living in Texas at the time, but I ended up moving back to Michigan after my daughter was born so that I could be closer to my family. And while attending school, I worked after a while. I think it was once my daughter turned 2. Mind you, I had been going to school and living by myself this whole time in Michigan. After moving back to Michigan, I lived by myself. I went to school full time. That's what I did. And took care of my kid. So I want to say when she turned 2 is when I decided to try and get a part-time job. So I got a part-time job with a security company doing everything from VIP armed security to bouncing at clubs in Royal Oak, all kinds of stuff. So as a single mom, I balanced it all with the support of, I had an amazing network of friends and family who helped me. I there's no words. I was very blessed to have the support system that I had. Otherwise, there would have been no way. Because as a single mom, it's just me. It was just me. So trying to accomplish all that, there would have been no way. Yeah, there would have been no way. So I ended up earning my associate's degree in accounting and business from Oakland Community College here in Michigan. And then later, I got a bachelor's degree in accounting from Northwood University. After graduating, I landed a job with the Army Audit Agency, also called AAA, where I worked for 2 years. Around that time, I had gotten married, and I was juggling, being a wife and being a mom and a full-time student. And it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a lot, but it was a lot. It was tough, but you have to push through that stuff. So I pushed through it. Eventually, my husband and I decided to have more kids, and I resigned from AAA because I was traveling so much. I probably about every other week I was traveling, and then I would be gone for a week, 2 weeks at a time, auditing whatever post I was at, whatever base I was at. So that was a lot. That was a lot. So I ended up resigning from AAA. The thing without it, I am not one to sit idle for very long. I can't sit idle. I have to have something to do. So by then, I had already published my first book, Adrenaline Rush, part of my military fiction series, which I had started outlining in middle school. So I had already started outlining that book in middle school and then picked the writing back up when I entered the military. Really, when I was in Korea was when I picked it back up again and really started writing. So while I was pregnant with my son, I wrote and published book 2. And then shortly after my son was born is when my now ex-husband and I decided to get divorced. So to support my family, because it was just me, once again, to support my family, I ended up going and getting my real estate license, because it's a flexible job for single mom. It's a great job. So around that time, I reconnected with my old squad leader from Korea. I was struggling. I was trying to figure out how to move forward, what I wanted to do. And I remember talking to him on the phone, and he still to this day remains to be a very important mentor to me. I remember telling him, I don't feel like that confident, corporal that I was in the army. It's like that part of me is taking the world's longest nap. And he replied, "I know who the fuck you are. You just need to wake her ass up. Fix it." So that's generally what it ended with. Fix it. So those words really stayed with me, and that's when I made the decision to decide to return to law enforcement, which is a career that I've always been passionate about. I pushed myself through the police academy as a single mom, which was one of the most challenging yet rewarding things that I've ever done. After graduating, I worked for a small department, but eventually stepped back to reevaluate my career path. Currently, I am pursuing a master's in strategic intelligence while continuing to write my Adrenaline Rush series, which, for anyone who doesn't know, my military fiction series, Adrenaline Rush, follows a female veteran named Kate Molson, who is a combat veteran navigating PTSD. She's transitioning, and she is an investigator now for another government agency. So book 3 is actually set to release in late February of this year, pending no setbacks. Hopefully there's no setbacks, guys. But yeah, it's a really good, it's a great military fiction series. I really wanted to write something that was going to both entertain and educate people on what, veterans, especially female veterans, go through when we're transitioning and how we handle PTSD, combat PTSD. I thought that was really an important perspective to write about because there's really not a lot. There's not a lot out there that just focuses on the female perspective of how we get through those things and what we deal with. So, yeah, life has definitely thrown me plenty of challenges, but I've learned that quitting is not an option. So, whether it doesn't matter what the problem is, you're either climbing the mountain or digging through it, but you're going to continue to move forward. End of story. There's no stopping. So, that's a little background on myself, your host for Iron Maidens. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave comments and email. You can find me on Facebook at Bevin Goldsmith. You can also find me on Instagram at Bevin Goldsmith. Look me up and add me. You can also find my Amazon author page. Just look up Bevin Goldsmith on Amazon. Other than that, stay strong, guys.